Before we move on to eventing, let's take another readability pass through the code. Specifically, I want to point your eyes here. All right, let's read it together. So I'm going to set up a projects variable, and presumably that'll be a collection of this query. So give me the projects where the owner, the creator of the project, is equal to the person who is currently signed in, and then get me the results, get me that collection. Now, still fairly simple, but there's a lot going on there. What are we really trying to say here? We're trying to say, give me the user's projects, right? Give me the authenticated user's projects. All right. Well, what if we could just say something like that? Give me the authenticated user, whoever that happens to be. In this case, we'll get it like this, but you could just as easily say, find whatever user that happens to be and give me their projects. Okay, so this is a bit more in line with what I actually want. So let's see if we can migrate from here to here. All right, well, if we want to have a project's relationship to user, it sounds like I need to visit my user model in the app directory. And if we scroll down, we'll now say a user has projects. And what is that relationship? Again, just speak it out. Is it has one? Well, does a user have one projects? No, that's not right. Is it has many? Does a user have many projects? Yes, that one works. So we'll say return, this has many, and the relationship is project. So now here's the cool thing about this. Because we're fetching the relationship in this way, the query basically expands to something like select star from projects where the owner ID is equal to the ID of this current instance of user. So if my ID is 1, it's going to expand to that automatically. So take a look at this. Let's see if it works. And I expect it not to, but I want to fix that together once we run into the issue. Okay, let's find the most recent user and give me the first one. Who's that? Okay, this is my dummy account. So I'm going to say, give me my projects, but it fails. So notice it's trying to find a user ID column in the projects table. This is the way Eloquent will or dynamically construct your query. Select star from projects where the project's user ID is equal to the ID of that current user instance. And it's using this because the model name is user. So Laravel's constructing user underscore ID is probably what you want. Except in this case, we could have done user ID on the table, but instead we chose a column name of owner ID. So I need to overwrite that as the second argument. Okay, now if I control C out and run it again, there we go. Here are all the projects for this user. All right, so this is super helpful and it improves readability. Now, rather than manually performing a query, fetching the ID, passing it in, I can just say, okay, whoever signed in, give me their projects. And that cleans this up quite a bit. What you can even do, some people like to do this a lot too, is they will just pass an array at this point and they'll say projects, and then they will inline it. Auth, user, projects. And that's perfectly fine as well if you like that approach. Looks good. Okay, let's make sure it still works. If I visit that page and give it a refresh, yep, I still have my projects, but I hope you agree, this is not only easier on the eyes, but it reads more in the way that we would speak it. Okay, next, if I scroll down, one other thing. So notice when we update an existing project, we don't perform any validation, which means we had that rule. Let's go to clean house and edit. We had that rule that a description needs to be at a bare minimum 3 characters. But let's just try to do 1 character. Update it. And that worked because we had no validation there. So you need to make sure that you duplicate it where necessary, or there's even something known as form request classes you could use as well. But often I would recommend keep it simple to start. So we will validate the request, and just like before, we have these rules. Now, if these don't validate, as before, it will redirect back. So let's try it again. Update. And now you didn't see it, but it did redirect back to this page. So yet again, we need those errors. And you'll remember many lessons ago when you create a project. So this is the view for projects/create. That's this view. Anyways, if we scroll down, we had this section errors, and we extracted a partial. Here's what that partial looks like. There's very basic and standard stuff. Okay, well, let's go to projects/edit and make sure we include that as well. And we can do that, how about right here? Include errors. Okay, so now if I switch back, give it a refresh. If I try to update this, the fact that we only have one character for the description should fail the validation. And now we give you super bright red feedback. So now let's fix it. Great. Now, if you want, the fact that you have the same validation here and here, I don't think it's too much of an issue, honestly. But if you want, you could extract that, of course, to a method. Validate project, and then we'll do something like this. So validate the request using these rules, and if it passes, we will return all of the validated attributes, which means if we scroll up, this can now be changed to this, validate project. And the same would be true right up here. So we'll get rid of all of that, and we'll say attributes equals validate project. Okay, let's see if that still works. Update it. It fails. Fix it again. And now it works. And of course, the same is going to be true if we create a project. It fails. Now, I did notice there we had a little extra space. We must have indentation. I'm going to go to projects/create, find the text area, and yeah, we're just going to put that all on the same line like so. Refresh. And now we don't have that extra space. Or you could strip it if you want. All right, so remember, as you're working along and you're learning new things, don't forget, everything comes back to basic readability. Go over the code and try to be very objective. Ask yourself, does this read as naturally as I want? And if it doesn't, and if I find myself adding comments because I really need to clarify for my future self what's going on, well, maybe that's the case. Maybe you can't simplify it, but usually that means you're missing something. Go back to the drawing board and figure out what you would need to do to make it as clear as possible so that the comments you add to explain it then become redundant. So for example, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the lesson, here, obviously, again, it's very simple to read for our example, but if you ever think, get all the projects for the authenticated user, if you ever do something like that, well, you're doing that because you're having a little trouble, whatever skill level you are, you're having a little trouble quickly parsing this. So you add a little comment. If that's the case, go back to the drawing board. Think, if we bring back our new code, if I ever said right here, get all the projects for the auth user, well, I think you'd agree it's completely redundant. Auth user projects, it's the same thing. There's no parsing that really has to go on here. Even if I brought in my wife or a family member who's not a coder, they would know what that means. So we can remove that.